You're watching the DSP Leaders Summit on the Cloud Native Telco. I'm Guy Daniels, Director of Content at TelecomTV. It's day 2 of this year's Cloud Native Telco Summit, and we are live on TelecomTV and also broadcasting to LinkedIn. Today's new content is now available to watch on demand here on TelecomTV and will be added to our Cloud Native channel on the website. Hopefully you've had time to watch the 2 new panel discussions today and are now eager to get involved. Well, now is your chance. For each of the 3 days of the summit, we'll be hosting a Q&A program with some of the panelists. It's live and we're waiting to hear from you. There's a form on the website for you to use, and that will get your questions directly to us. I say us because I'm joined once again by my colleague Ray Maistre, who is Editorial Director here at TelecomTV. Good afternoon, Ray. It's a wet Wednesday afternoon here in the UK. Hopefully that hasn't dampened your cloud native outlook.
Absolutely not, Guy. And as you can see, the sun, or the full sun, is shining on me here in the Surrey studios in the UK. And it's been a great day already. We've had 2 excellent panels on some of the key challenges and key issues that telcos have to address as they embrace cloud native. And of course, that's people and processes. That's always coming up as a key challenge. And for those telcos who have already started down the road of cloud native, we've been looking at how they need to operationalize. And of course, that's where the rubber hits the road. So, it'd be great, of course, if we can have questions for our panelists during today's live Q&A. So get on the website, get into that question part of the page, and let's have some more questions. But Guy, I think back over to you.
Thank you, Ray. And as Ray says, please get your questions in. For the next 30 minutes or so, this is your opportunity to question our industry experts. Although like yesterday's session, that was more like 45 minutes, I think, with so many of your questions to get through. So please keep them coming in. Time now to introduce our guests, and I'm delighted to welcome back 3 of our speakers from the How to Operationalize Cloud Native panel. We have Paul Miller, Chief Technology Officer at Wind River, who is joining us from New Hampshire. Beth Cohen, SDN Product Strategies at Verizon, is joining us from Boston. And joining from Bangalore is Swaminathan Venkataraman, who is Product and Solution Architect CMS with Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. Plus, fresh from the People and Processes panel, Ildiko Vancha is Ecosystem Technical Lead for the OpenStack Foundation, and she joins us from Budapest. And from San Francisco, a very good morning to Heather Kirksey, VP Community and Ecosystem Development at the Linux Foundation, who will also be taking part in one of our panels tomorrow. Welcome all of you. Good to see you all again. And to everyone watching, please keep sending in your questions. We've said it a few times, we'll keep saying it. We'll get through as many as we can. But first, Ray, over to you for our very first question.
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Guy. And this first question I'm going to direct towards Heather. Heather, to what extent do telcos need blueprints or examples to become comfortable at taking their first steps towards embracing cloud native?
I think blueprints are really helpful when it comes to that, as well as an opportunity to try out, different stacks, figure out how to integrate them, figure out what needs to get tested, and take those learnings so that there's some uniformity in how folks are addressing cloud native when they operationalize it, and so that they can get their hands dirty with some actual implementation work as well.
Great. And I mean, are we seeing more of these kind of blueprints, more examples being shared in the industry in around a topic like cloud native, more so than we might have done a few years ago, do you think?
Definitely. And I know that, someone like Beth can probably talk about this, but we've got work going on in a project called CNTT that is coming up with some architectures and requirements, and then alongside OPNFV, who's actually implementing some of those reference implementations and creating that in code, as well as creating test suites for folks to use with their actual vendors in-house as they start to bring in implementations from their partners and suppliers.
Okay, excellent.
So I'd like
All right,
to
Guy.
step in.
There's Beth.
If that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely, Beth. Please do.
So speaking from the telecom perspective, it's essential that we have guidance and blueprints that we can work with our vendors to move forward. So the work that CNTT's been doing and OPNFE and other open source projects have been instrumental in really moving this forward much faster. So that's what we're looking for from the telecom perspective.
Okay, excellent. Guy, over to you. And I think you have a question going back to Beth again.
I think I do, Ray, indeed. It's an anonymous question, but I've got the feeling it's probably from a disgruntled infrastructure vendor. The question is, we keep coming up against antiquated and labyrinthine procurement processes, which he says are totally unacceptable in a cloud native world. But where are the signs that this is changing? Beth, do you agree that the procurement processes generally, and we're not talking about specific telcos here, but generally are perhaps not fit for purpose today?
Well, not being on the procurement side of the house, I can't speak for what we do, but I agree that the procurement processes are still labyrinthian, but they're not technical. That's not the issue. It's the contract stuff. And when you live in a telco world, you're very concerned with legal ramifications and requirements. Country regulations get in the way, and having just gone through a GDPR PR review of my products, I can say, a whole lot of it is not necessarily generated from an obvious place of, let's just go ahead and test it out and then sign the contract. There's a whole lot that goes on behind the scenes that doesn't have much to do with the technology. So I'm not sure if that makes the person who asked the question any happier.
I suspect to be disgruntled for quite some time to come, knowing the speed of change of telcos. Unless anybody else wants to come in on that question, I'll hand it. Oh, yeah, Paul, please do.
Yeah, I guess I can just provide a quick comment from the vendor perspective. We've certainly seen some changes there, right? As we bring open source based technologies into the service provider market. Not so much with procurement specifically, in that you still engage in the regular contractual negotiations and need to move that forward. But the introduction of pure software-based systems in Cloud Native has introduced really the shift towards more OpEx-based deal paradigms, where you have a subscription model or pay-per-use model. That's fairly new for the telco domain, which was previously in a CapEx, buy once and provide support and maintenance mode. So we've seen some changes there. We've also seen changes contractually with concerns about what regions of the world, as we have a global development team, are permitted to have access to the service provider data, as well as handling things like indemnification and pass-through as we work with the service provider with our source code and escrow. So the cloud native change has changed some aspects of that contractual negotiation and procurement process as a result of those things.
Thanks very much, Paul. Ray, let's move on to our next question, shall we?
Yeah, absolutely. And great answer and great insight there, Paul. And I'm coming straight back to you again. We're doubling up here. And this is a bit of a crowdsourced question, got to admit that. But it's certainly one I'm keen to know the answer to. And because there's a lot of engagement these days between the telcos and the big public cloud platform players, do you think telcos need to kickstart their cloud native strategies at the same time as their edge computing strategies? I mean, do the two naturally go together? Do they need to go together?
Yeah, that's actually a really great question. We've seen a few things happening here, right? There's a couple of different topics you touched on there. One is the relevance of the hyperscalers or the public cloud providers and how they're entering the telco domain. We definitely see that with the likes of Azure Edge Zones or Amazon Outpost and Wavelength, right? And playing roles in our service provider networks as they bring public cloud hosted application domains, gaming, streaming capabilities, right, for media You've seen some press about that from a variety of different service providers. They're kind of entering from the core of the service provider network and pushing out towards the edge. On the edge of the network, though, we tend to see, the ultra-high availability requirements around 6 nines, the need to support a highly distributed architecture with tens of thousands of nodes, continuing to bring the service provider to run and manage their own infrastructure as they do that. But we absolutely do see the hyperscalers entering from that perspective. Second half of your question I've forgotten, so if you want to fire it at me again, I'll touch on it.
Yeah, it was really whether those cloud native, like embracing cloud native and then sort of fulfilling or starting on an edge computing strategy, whether they should go together, whether they're very closely tied or not.
Yeah, so I think what we've seen is the need in the service provider market, at least, to have a rational business case around building an edge compute solution. Obviously, service providers have huge networks, and to deploy tens of thousands of sites with virtualized infrastructure is a significant investment. And what we've really seen is that while a lot of new business cases around autonomous vehicles and telemedicine, AR, VR in the industrial sector, they're enabled by the edge compute paradigm. That's not network pervasive. You need a network pervasive business case to get that infrastructure stood up. And 5G really has become that for us, that we see 5G and MEC really providing a solid business case to build a deployable infrastructure that's based on virtualization. And then as you begin to deploy those other applications, you're now scaling that existing infrastructure that's been hardened by the 5G core infrastructure deployment and reusing and scaling it to bring those advanced applications to bear. That's how we see Cloud Native being deployed, kind of supported by that initial business case, but with an eye towards the advanced applications that are coming out into the market and the need to support them.
Okay, so I sense there's a little bit, it would be good to tie those in there. Okay, we've got a number of hands up here. Let's go to Ildiko at the top of our stack first.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to add to what Paul said, that I think it's important to highlight that Cloud Native itself is a concept and a set of principles. And it's not necessarily really about the cloud itself, but also about the applications and the workload, and making sure that the workloads are really prepared for what the infrastructure under them has to offer. And when it comes to edge computing, which is really about also bringing the computational power closer to the end users, let them be humans or machines, in order to be able to implement edge computing the best we can, I think making sure that we are following these cloud native principles throughout the implementation, and really putting together the infrastructure as well as putting the workloads on top. I think that's really important, and that's also a way to look at how cloud native and edge computing relates to each other.
Okay, excellent. And Swami, you had your hand up there as well.
Yeah, just to add to what was being said here is that the beauty of this whole thing is that in your question, there is also an uncertainty, and with uncertainty is also an opportunity, right? And that the whole thing about edge versus core is driven by the use case and the applications that you want to launch. The whole idea of Cloud Native is to get you that agility that you require. So not everything will require you to get deployed on the edge. There will be some use cases that will definitely require you to get deployed on the edge. We are not just talking about carrier core. We are also talking about non-public networks, private 5G, and so on. So there is going to be a lot of use cases that will actually require telco operators to be agile. And whether they start from an edge to core or a core to edge strategy, they need to be able to orchestrate the networks right from the edge to the core, to have zero-touch deployments, to be able to have the use cases launched in a timely fashion, and to satisfy use cases. Because at the end of the day, 5G is all about use cases. And to drive those use cases, whether you deploy at the data center at the region or at a central place or at the edge, should be driven by the use case. And that is where Cloud Native helps you to realize that in a very agile fashion. So I think it's a great question. It's also an anchor question to why Cloud Native actually is very important for telcos to be able to realize these kind of use cases.
Okay. Excellent, Swami. Thanks very much. Okay, great insights there. Guy, I'm going to hand back over to you now.
Well, Thanks, Ray. And we're going to continue this this double-handed routine because I'm going straight back to Swami with our next question, and it's another question about core technologies. Swami, how important is Cloud Native to telcos' 5G strategies? So, we could have guessed we were going to get 5G into this conversation at some point. How far will they get if they don't embrace Cloud Native?
I think all the questions that have been posed here, right from sourcing strategies to whether to start from the edge to the core, all basically require an element of intentional architectures that are not big design upfronts, actually that are agile in nature, right? So if you do not want to be agile, you want to be monolithic, you want to try what you have tried out in the past, I think nothing stops you from implementing it that way. But if you look at 5G as a set of very interesting use cases, vehicle to X, V2X was being mentioned, robotics was being mentioned, there are different use cases that require us to be able to deploy networks that actually cater to a particular use case. So what we are really talking about is a network for a use case. We are not talking about network for everything, right? So to be able to do that, you need to have a set of blueprints that you mentioned already. You need to have a set of method of procedures. You need to have a way to actually embrace DevOps, containers, microservices, continuous deployment to be able to successfully fail even in a telco kind of environment. Where will you get it else if you don't adopt Cloud Native? And that's the whole point, right? So Cloud Native brings that kind of agility, the kind of thinking that you would need to deploy such networks. So they will get far, but not far enough to actually harness the entire power of 5G, in my humble opinion. So we need Cloud Native. It is going to change the way telco operators are going to source, deploy, run, automate, operate 5G networks for specific use cases. So I think they will not get very far if they don't adopt Cloud Native.
Thank you, Swami. And I think, Paul, you'd like to come in on this one as well?
Yeah, I would. Thank you. Certainly, we think it's actually even more serious, right? In that, if you look at first the shift to virtualization, right? Obviously, some of the use cases we talked about previously are driving that shift to virtualization so that the infrastructure can host multiple applications. Once you're on that type of track, your choice is really about virtualization using legacy technologies that use virtual machines or adopting cloud native principles around containers and Kubernetes management and that sort of thing. What we've found is that with 5G in particular, there are some incredible high performance demands. As you progress farther and farther to the edge of the network, latency becomes hypercritical. High performance and performance at low scale with highly performant Linux environments becomes more critical. Therefore, if you're a service provider deploying tens of thousands of sites and you need a lot of infrastructure placed at each edge site, the business case has a high cost basis, both from an OpEx maintenance perspective and a CapEx initial purchase and deployment perspective. So Cloud Native has really enabled this evolution where at the edge, where latency and performance are sensitive, a containerized solution is more performant, right? It has a lower latency in that solution. It has a higher scale capability because you're not tying up cores and CPUs with different applications. You've got a containerized architecture that enables you to bring things effectively as applications in Linux namespace to that edge device, giving you a higher density of applications in that compute node, allowing you to shrink the footprint at that edge site. All of these things are enabled by a cloud native technology and a containerized architecture. And we think that they're absolutely critical to meet the technical requirements around performance for 5G, as well as the scale necessary to build a business case for a large scale network.
Excellent. Thanks, Paul. And Beth.
Yes. So I'd like to add that it's not just about the telco infrastructure. I think there's a lot of meat in moving cloud native out to the customer sites. So I guess you could call it private MAC, but it doesn't necessarily even need to be 5G or MAC. But there's a lot of edge happening where it's partially owned by the telco and partially owned by the customer. And in those situations, again, because there are thousands of sites, you obviously want to do net DevOps on steroids to optimize not only the resources that are at the edge, which are frequently constrained, but also the management of those large number of sites.
Great, thanks, Beth. We shall move on, I think, and I shall hand over to Ray.
Thanks, Guy. We've got a question for Ildiko now. Ildiko, is it? I mean, we've been talking here about what telcos might need to do in people and processes and how they need to learn new skills, but is that all absolutely necessary? Do they have to become experts on cloud native methodologies and processes themselves? Could they just outsource it all?
I think in some extent they do, and I think they are already on the path to do that. But I think that what's more important really is to kind of become part of this journey and be faster to adopt to changes and eventually kind of being on top of that wave that happens in technology, because everything is just changing faster and faster. Today we are talking about cloud native. I don't know what we will talk about tomorrow, but I'm sure it will be completely different. So it's a really fast pace that technology evolves with. And when it comes to telecommunications, I think the cloud transformation kind of introduced this. We need to be more flexible, more agile. We need to really put some effort into evolving the processes that we work with, also looking into how the people can evolve as well, learn on the go. And the other aspect to look into is standardization, I think, because that's also something that is really important in this industry, and being able to integrate all the different bits and pieces and components and making sure that all the parts of the infrastructure can talk to each other is really important. But the way how standards get created and then how we are testing it out in action, I think that's also something that needs to evolve with the people and processes when it comes to evolution for telcos.
Okay, excellent. So let's see, Heather. I can see Heather waving there from San Francisco. Hey,
yes, hi. Hey, Ray. I kind of wanted to add, can you just outsource all of this, especially around processes? And, I would sort of argue that more important even than, for example, understanding the deep bits of, say, Kubernetes code or things like that, the process is actually more important for the telcos to move to something like CI/CD, the agile processes, the, dynamic workload placement. Those aspects are actually, I think, more core to what the operators need to sort of take in and use and leverage, maybe even more so than a deep understanding of the specifics of, some of the code out there. And I know we often, as technologists and as an industry, tend to get a little bit more excited about technology than processes. But, I really think, adopting the DevOps, the Agile, the CI/CD is actually more core even for, the way folks want to, be agile with their service offerings and their business plans than even sort of becoming technical experts. If you're looking at things to partner with or things to look to your vendors to provide, they're not going to be able to get out of some of the process stuff.
Okay. I mean, just as an example, I mean, if we think maybe of a tier 3 or a small regional operator, do you think it might be possible to outsource all of those kind of processes to a systems integrator and maybe just focus on, I don't know, the marketing and billing and customer relationships? Do you think that kind of thing is more possible in a cloud native 5G world? Or is that pie in the sky thinking?
It's a good question. I'm not sure, and I'd love to hear from some of the other folks here on this, but I think it would be sort of, to a certain extent, the same pros and cons of outsourcing what is one of your core offerings that is ever there. But certainly I think you need to understand, if you're doing the marketing and sourcing still, to understand, going back to that procurement question, to understand the differences between, your traditional infrastructure and more of a cloud native, agile infrastructure, because how else are you going to even evaluate the criteria for working with a potential outsource partner unless you have some understanding of what Cloud Native is bringing to the table?
Okay. Yeah, Beth. Oh, okay. We've got lots of hands up. Let's go to Beth first and then Swami.
I really question the value of a tier 3 or tier 2 provider outsourcing this to a system integrator. We're not selling sneakers here. These are services, network services, and so just to hold on to the marketing, I think we're giving away the store and to the integrator, because there's what's stopping the integrator from then offering those services themselves. So I actually question the wisdom of outsourcing those components. I'm not saying that Cloud Native isn't very valuable. It is, and it allows the tier 2 and tier 3 providers to be more efficient and be potentially more profitable by driving costs out of their infrastructure.
Sure, absolutely. And Swami, I can see your hand up there.
Yeah, I think if we stay with your tier 3 classification, I think somewhere the solution is somewhere in the middle, right? As Beth rightly said, why would you actually give up everything? Why the data, seek, for example, authentication or registration related procedures and so on. There could be many things that are important that you actually understand and understand how it's implemented in a cloud native infrastructure, and actually implement it according to what are the security needs of a telco, and only look at offloading certain processes, certain applications that can be actually delegated and get implemented through an integrator. So I don't think you can just throw it across the fence and expect it to happen. So as was mentioned by Heather, you need to understand the processes. You need to understand the technology. As a people organization, you need to be able to embrace the DevOps and agile procedures that come with it, and then determine what can be actually worked upon by an integrator and what should be something that you need to keep under your control, right? And then it becomes very meaningful to actually build an efficient network, especially for a tier 3. But again, if it's not a tier 3, I mean, I see no reason. But basically, if it's a tier 3, I think you still need to be diligent in what you actually get done by an integrator versus what you do by yourself, by actually acquiring the best products that can actually deliver those network functions.
Absolutely. Great. Thanks. Great points all. But of course, we have seen the crown jewels given away in circumstances over the years. So we never know what's going to happen here. So Guy, back over to you at this point.
Yeah, thanks, Ray. Great discussion so far. We've really we've heard from everybody. Everybody's contributed. We managed to divide up this initial set of questions we received from our viewers rather nicely, I think. Just to mention while we're here, we have a viewer poll running on the site. It's right there next to the question form. It really is nice and simple. There's just 4 choices, I believe, and 1 answer, hopefully. We're asking, do telcos need to add cloud native methodologies and practices right now, or can they wait? So please take a couple of seconds to click on the relevant answer, and we'll take a look at the results at the end of the session. We're running this poll across all 3 days, and the more votes we get, the more representative it will be. Anybody hoping for a quick cup of coffee or other beverage might have to wait a bit longer, because I think we've got more questions coming in. Ray, what have we got next?
Okay, we've got a question for Beth. So Beth, does introducing cloud native to the telco sector mean that we could end up essentially with a telco function app store? Could we get to the point where service providers, network operators might be able to go to an online repository and simply download a function that they would be able to slot into their architecture?
Wow, that would be nirvana, but I don't see it anytime soon. A lot of it has to do with that although some components are rapidly becoming cloud native, particularly on the technical side, around the networking. Don't forget, there's huge numbers of legacy apps floating around, the BSS and the OSS apps, all of which have huge amount of technical debt, and one questions whether it's even worth converting many of these systems, which have been online for many years, into cloud native. It's a huge effort for rather little improvement to the functionality. So that would be. I think there's some room for that in the particularly down in the widgets side of things, but I don't see that as something that's going to happen anytime in the near future.
Okay. Yes, Swami.
Just to add to what Beth said, if you look at it purely from what levers are available today or what enablers are available today, many network functions, when you implement them as containers and run them on Kubernetes, and if you are automating their life cycle using the concept of operators, it becomes very interesting depending on what you're deploying to be able to actually get it from a hub to be able to then install, configure, and actually automate that kind of an experience. That actually is not really what you asked. You asked for more an application kind of, an app store. Now, what might be interesting and what we see happening is that there are discussions now happening on provisioning, especially around non-public networks where you have 5G being adopted by enterprises and so on. I think, as Beth rightly mentioned, the processes around how you provision or how you basically, satisfy that demand of configuring your own network, I think that could be a very interesting consumerized experience, right? And that is something that we have to watch out for. But the question is very interesting because if you look at the use case is the one that will drive this kind of a consumerized experience on applications. And how you actually deploy those applications right from the core from the edge to the core or core to the edge and orchestrate the whole experience would be very, very interesting in the few months or years to come, actually. But that's what cloud native and 5G actually promise, right? You are able to then now go web scale. You're able to create an interesting consumerized experience. So it's an interesting question, but I think we will have to wait a bit for it.
Absolutely. Well, there's 5G promises and then there's real world deliverables. Let's see how close the two get together. Okay. Oh, Paul, I can see. Is that your hand up?
Yes, I'll be brief. Basically, I wanted to answer the original question, and the answer is an absolute resounding yes. Right? We certainly believe in, and I think you'll see in a very short time frame, the concept of an app marketplace, an app ecosystem, the ability to take VNFs and CNFs or cloud native functions directly on board through a certification program, the ability to make that catalog selectable for the service provider and easily deployable from a dashboard, the ability to integrate open source or proprietary components into that app catalog, that's absolutely within the realm of possibility, and we'll see that in the near term, not the far term. And yes, Beth's comments were correct. There's a lot of legacy stuff in the network, but that doesn't keep us from moving forward, right? And creating these capabilities as the network shifts to more virtualized and more cloud native, they'll be able to make more use of that type of application infrastructure. But it's absolutely a yes.
Okay, excellent. Well, that'll be really interesting if and when it happens. And of course, we're already seeing some moves in the market to suggest that these kind of things might be attempted sooner rather than later with some functionality. So it'll be really interesting to see. So Swami, actually coming straight back to you now, actually, does it make sense? We've heard a lot of suggestions about how communication service providers should try and embrace cloud native. Does it make sense for them to maybe focus on one service or maybe one particular market to start with, try it out, see how it goes, and learn from that process? Like keep it local or keep it focused to start with?
I think as was mentioned by Paul as well, this is all driven by a sound business case that will have to be laid out, and it really depends upon where the focus markets are for the telco. But again, 5G promises a lot of use cases. Right? the whole idea is to be either deliver better density, bandwidth, or low latency, and realize those kind of use cases. So at this point in time, what we are seeing is that there is an intent to deploy a particular set of use cases, even starting with a single market. But we are also seeing in parallel, as I said, just like we see carrier core in the public domain, we are also seeing non-public networks, which you call mostly as private, also taking shape. So we are seeing both going in parallel. There are about 5 to 6 use cases when it comes to the non-public network. When it comes to the public network, we are seeing the classical use cases that have always been there. But I think we are still in a phase where we have come across, or we have crossed the hype. We are actually into deployments, and we will now learn along with the experience that it will provide, the use cases it will provide, and we will move forward. But what we see definitely is that it is not a single threaded use case. We see more than a single use case, and it's right now broadly categorized between what you do on the public network versus how you actually tackle the private enterprises and so on. So we see both of this happening. I think if you look at them as two key large domains, then the learnings will be within that, right? And from there onwards, I think it will be interesting to see how that gets applied to different use cases. But that is what we are seeing as trends today. What is clear is that we have moved beyond just understanding what 5G can deliver to actually beginning to deploy, experience those use cases through soft launch and so on, and to see what use cases work, but primarily between the public and non-public networks at this point in time.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Okay, Guy, over to you.
Thanks, Ray. And one has just come through in the past 10 minutes or so, and I think Ildiko, I'd like to ask this one to you, or at least to start to you. Have we in the industry, have we focused too much on this transition from day zero to day one, this day zero, day one, day two terminology? And have we neglected the important considerations of day two, actually running and maintaining our services?
It's a good question. And interestingly enough, we have a project that is supported by the OpenStack Foundation. It's called Airship. And this project was created by AT&T and a few partners 2 years ago, or 2.5 by now, I think, specifically to address the challenges of day two operations. Although I also think that the journey itself has been really hard for the telecommunication industry to move from the specialized hardware and the specialized operating system and infrastructure services, and then the applications on top and the workloads on top. So moving from that into the cloud and understanding how it works, how to deploy it, how to make everything work that worked in the more legacy traditional environments before that, it was a massive challenge, and it was a kind of a painful journey for a little while. And we also experienced that on the open source side, kind of trying to help the telecommunications companies, both operators and vendors, who came to these communities trying to understand how these infrastructures work. And at the same time, we also tried to help them to go through this journey and just guide them towards really accepting what cloud has to offer, as opposed to trying to replicate the same environment with a cloud platform that they used to have before, with all the specialized implementations. And once that started to happen, that's when we came to the point of, okay, I have my infrastructure up and running, and now I have to keep it running. I have to be able to operate it. I have to be able to maintain. I have to be able to upgrade, for instance, which is one of the really painful processes, and not necessarily only because what the different platforms are supporting, but also just the methodologies that the operators used to follow. Like the older a release is, the more stable it should be. But when it comes to the cloud native principles and the technology evolution today, the fast pace in being able to upgrade to a latest software version is what will give you something that is more stable, something that more companies and organizations had the chance to try out, and also what has the most bug fixes in, not just the latest features. So that's when it comes to trying to also ensure that the day two operations get implemented in an automated way.
Thanks, Ildiko. And I'd love to bring in Paul on this one as well.
Yeah, thank you. So this is pretty exciting territory, right? And also under the OpenStack Foundation is a project called Starlingx. And Starlingx, as an open source initiative, was really founded to address the problem that the person asking the question was looking to discover the answer to. And really the reason why that was done was around the core needs of a distributed cloud infrastructure. Starlingx, as an open source project, solves a lot of the problems relevant to day two operations. Things like zero-touch provisioning and zero-touch deployment. If you're deploying and managing thousands or tens of thousands of sites, that's a critical capability. The ability to perform live software update on a running cloud native infrastructure and deploy patches from everything from the Linux kernel or Linux platform all the way up through the most advanced application layers. Doing that from a zero-touch perspective from a live running network is critical to maintaining high availability in the deployment. So in addition to that open source activity, which, by the way, provided the foundation of the nation's first 5G virtualized call recently at Verizon via our commercialized version of it, cloud platform from Wind River, we also have introduced for day two operations, learning from building and deploying that type of system, a advanced analytics platform that then runs from a day two only perspective, providing advanced dashboard visualizations, trending, alarming, et cetera, so that you can keep an eye on in real time the entire deployed infrastructure. This also provides a platform for artificial intelligence and machine learning applications, such as those used for predictive analytics to avoid accidents and outages that can occur in the network, doing so predictively to avoid them before they actually occur. So these type of capabilities are all geared around meeting the service provider's operational needs, and they're really critical to ensuring that you can actually deploy and operate a huge network of virtualized assets such as we're talking about.
Thanks, Paul. And Beth, I think I saw your hand there as well.
Yeah, so I can speak from experience. I would say the operations people are still a little behind. They have, I think, successfully made the leap from specialized appliances to the virtual machines. They're still working on making the next step to containerized and cloud native type applications. And as Paul said rightly, all the tools are great, but the title of this one of the panels was people and processes, and I think that's where the operations people are really struggling with, needing to change their processes to really take advantage of the cloud native. The fact that the hardware is completely disaggregated. That was a concept that I know that many of the operations people just really had a hard time with. And the systems are, have shifted so that they can support that, but it's a mindset, and that's what's been slower to come within the operations community. And also traditionally the operations people don't necessarily contribute into the open source community in general. That tends to be more the architects and the engineers. So they may not be so up on a lot of the net dev ops and CI/CD type mindsets. So I think that's just been a slower evolution within the telecom operations world.
Yeah, great point. Thanks, Beth. And Swami, you'd like to comment on this as well?
Yeah, so very quickly, data operations, when you look at it and look at it from the challenges that exist, is Cloud Native brings an entire new set of methodologies, tools on how you do things, right? And there is the existing methodology and the existing deployments that operators have just completed, right? So there needs to be a bridge, something that makes it extremely simple for data operations to actually work between these two worlds as they coexist for some time. Mainly, if you look at it from an automation perspective, it is not just about automating deployments, it's also about automating upgrades, for example, with zero downtime, right? In service software upgrades. How do you actually ensure that what is running in your cluster is what is that you intended to deploy? So that is where concepts like GitOps and all this start to come in. And that is where I think the challenge lies as well, because these are new things that as an organization you need to adopt and you need to actually embrace those processes. But then we as vendors, and we also have the responsibility to make it simple for telco operators to be able to bridge these two worlds. How does GitOps sit with actually NFV orchestration? How does basically upgrades work when you actually orchestrate it from a Mano, for example? Or for that matter, what is the difference between observability in a cloud native world to assurance in a telco world? How do you bridge these two things? Similarly, there is visibility. I mean, telco operations is used to looking at visibility at a PCAP level. Now we are talking about traces that are coming at an application level. So how do we actually bridge this gap? I think there is a discussion that needs to happen. There needs to be a fundamental change in embracing this and actually integrating with existing processes, existing tools, existing technologies. And that is what will allow actually day two operations to be implemented efficiently, because otherwise what we are going to be talking about is FCAPs at one end. We're going to be talking about observability at the other end. We're going to be talking about upgrades at the hardware level, at the container platform level, at the single pane of glass like what was being mentioned. But then there is also the NF, the network function upgrade itself. So how does this all come together is going to be very interesting. And that is why marrying cloud native with an existing telco processes and tool set is very important. And the key is to make it simple.
Great. Well, that is quite the key. And yes, make it simple. That should be our mantra here. Make it simple. Great comments, everyone. Thank you very much. Before we wrap things up, though, we ought to take a look at how the poll is coming along, because we've been asking you if telcos need to add cloud native methodologies and practices right now, or can they wait? The results so far on my screen on my right, and the very latest data, well, we've seen a shift from yesterday. I can tell you that right now. We are neck and neck between viewers who think it's too mission critical to delay and it must be done right now, and those who think we need to do it within the next 6 to 12 months. The number of respondents saying you can wait, there's no need to panic, is no rush, is decreasing by the minute. Thank goodness for that. Ray, what do you make of that?
Well, I thought we were going to add an option to say yesterday, as suggested by Nathan from Deutsche Telekom yesterday, but we obviously haven't done that. But yeah, it's no surprise to see that there's a sense of urgency in the results there from the readers at TelecomTV. I'm sure a lot of them have a vested interest to make things happen as soon as possible as well.
I think you're right there, but we must do it simply as well. That's the key. Well, that's pretty much all the time we have for today. In fact, we've gone way over our allocated time. A big thank you to all our guests, because it has been a really engaging discussion. Thank you very much for that. And thank you all for watching the program and sending in your questions. This has been tremendous. Keep sending those questions in. Keep them coming. We'll use them for our next Q&A session, which is tomorrow. Speaking of which, we'll be back tomorrow. It's our last live Q&A program of the Cloud Native Telco Summit, and 5 new guests will be joining us then. Our theme for tomorrow is the relationship between Cloud Native and the Telco Cloud. And we have a new panel discussion for you, plus another exclusive keynote interview. We'll then pick up the themes and explore them further during the Q&A session, which is going to happen again at 4:30 p.m. UK time. That is all the time we have today, though. Thank you very much for joining us, and we do hope to see you again tomorrow. For now, thank you and goodbye.